Get more discussions on the Middle East conflict and its impacts on global markets. For that, let's bring in Jamil Ahmed, Chief Analyst, Online Trading Brokerage GTC. Jamil, thank you so much for joining us on the program. First of all, with the ongoing situation in the Middle East, do you think it's going to create sustained volatility through global capital markets?
Well, at the moment, I would say the volatility has been somewhat contained. And actually, you're looking at two different asset classes where you have seen volatility, naturally in the oil markets and also in the US dollar. The latter has been particularly interesting because you're starting to see safe haven flows go back into the greenback as a holding currency. And that's something that's impacting emerging markets effects. And also with this, I think that we're going to start to see, should this crisis go on past in another couple of weeks, we're going to start seeing volatility in other asset classes from global markets, gold. And that's because of the economic repercussions that can come from what's happening in the geopolitical atmosphere. For example, when it comes to central banking, there was so many expectations for 2026 to see the likes of the US Federal Reserve and so forth continue to cut interest rates. And that was priced into the markets, particularly with global markets and also with gold. But now that those expectations are likely to be pushed back, and in fact, I do expect them to be pushed back, we will then start to see volatility in those asset classes as well.
Now, speaking of gold, we know that gold prices have been up and down, swinging wildly since the tensions in the Middle East. What is your outlook?
Well, I still think that gold prices, if you look at the historical context, they're actually still inflated. It was 5,000 US dollars in gold just yesterday. And again, I would now look at the different risks, not just what's happened in the geopolitical atmosphere, which hopefully will be contained and not last longer than what it already has. But in fact, the economic repercussions here, you will not have the US Federal Reserve that will continue to cut interest rates. You're going to have central banks worldwide start to warn about inflation risk, and higher inflation risk means less motivation on the central banks to cut interest rates. And we all know that when it comes to lower interest rate expectations and higher gold prices, that correlation was there. So as soon as you take those interest rate expectations out of the equation, you're going to have less, I would say, ambition to hold on to gold prices, specifically with the US dollar strengthening. And as a result of this, I do expect gold prices to continue to correct lower.
And also, the conflict has been pushing oil prices sharply higher. Do you think this is, this of course is putting and having an impact on airlines globally. What kind of pressure do you think the industry would face if elevated fuel costs persist?
We're still going to see volatility in oil prices because we're in a region which is particularly sensitive to that commodity when it comes to producing and also supplying that commodity to the market. So for as long as that's in question, we're going to see more volatility in oil prices, which is going to be passed on to consumers and different industries, including the airline sector. But generally speaking, airlines are still operational. Between March the 1st and March the 12th, you had more than 1.4 million passengers traveling throughout the Middle East. So I still think the airlines are going to be operational. Just at some point, they're going to see prices start to increase.
Earlier, we had a report on how the travel industry in the Middle East suffering big losses on a daily basis. How do you think the industry can adapt to this prolonged uncertainty?
Well, again, despite what's happened in the geopolitical atmosphere, I will repeat, between March 1st and March 12th, you had more than 1.4 million passengers passing through the United Arab Emirates. And authorities strictly suggested and indicated within hours of this happening that hotels were going to continue to house all guests, to provide accommodation, catering, and that all costs would be covered by the authorities based in the United Arab Emirates. So I think they are adapting. It just happens to be the question is there for how long this situation will persist.
Well, great stuff. Thank you so much. That's Jamil Ahmed, Chief Analyst at Online Trading Brokerage GTC for us. Thank you.